Many scientists, clinicians, and medical communicators are turning to AI to refine their writing. Although AI tools like large language models or LLMs can be really useful, they have risks and limitations that require human oversight and communication skills. A couple of weeks ago, I shared some of the key risks and limitations of these tools, and last week I shared some best practices for using AI tools responsibly. In the next two videos, I'll go head-to-head with an AI editing tool to show you how these tools can and can't help you to refine your writing. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And since 2011, I've helped scientists, clinicians, and medical communicators write with intention, clarity, and confidence. So I mentioned that I will go head-to-head with an AI editing tool. What exactly does that mean? So in this video, I'm going to take a text sample and plug it into an editing AI tool that I know a lot of people, even professional editors, like to use. And it's called EditGPT. Now, to be clear, they are not a sponsor of this video. And you'll see me critique good and bad things about this tool. And in the future, I might occasionally experiment with other tools as well on this channel. So that's this video, and next week I'll walk you through how I would revise the sample. And I'm breaking it into two videos because I know that you are busy and I want to respect your time. I am so grateful for every second that you spend with me. Okay, so what is the sample text? The sample includes a short paragraph that I drafted for this video based on something that I read and that reflects some of the writing problems that I saw in that original excerpt. Although I could use the actual excerpt, which was published as an open access article with a CC BY license, I don't want to publicly critique someone's writing without their explicit permission. So I created a sample that has those same problems. And what we are going to do is plug the sample text into EditGPT and see how the tool revises the example based on the different options that the tool has. And because I wrote this sample, I'm not worried about confidentiality or the tool using my text for something. Although EditGPT seems to have a pretty straightforward data retention and deletion policy that states they will not use your information. But as I mentioned last week, be sure to read the terms and privacy policy very carefully so that you feel confident about using it. Okay, let's get to the sample text. So when you open EditGPT, this is what you see. And so you can see at the top, there are some different options for editing levels, I would say, or styles. And we're going to take a look at each of those. And then there are some other features such as undoing and redoing changes, accepting or rejecting changes, which it will show you with track changes, which is really great, actually. And then there's a few other tools as well. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in the sample text, and bear with me for a moment. I'm going to read it out loud. So the sample text reads, numerous studies have demonstrated a significant correlation between decreased serum albumin levels and an increased incidence of atrial fibrillation. While this has been consistently observed in many studies, the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin levels in patients at risk for atrial fibrillation remain unclear. Consequently, it is imperative to assess the causal relationship between serum albumin levels and atrial fibrillation to facilitate the development of new therapeutic strategies for atrial fibrillation. Okay, so what I'm going to do is walk through each of these different options and just see what EditGPT suggests. So the first one is grammar. So I'm just going to click on grammar and you can see it's processing. You can see what it does, and it didn't make any suggestions, which maybe I should have ensured that there was a grammar mistake in here, because I have noticed that it will catch missing commas and things like that. So it can be helpful for that. So just to be safe, I'm going to undo that. So we're going to revert as though no changes were made. And then we're going to do this light version. Oh, and it even says, so proofread this, but only fix grammar. And then light is proofread this lightly. So we're going to click on this and see what it suggests. And it didn't make any suggestions there. So I will say I've experimented with this tool and I have seen that it can make a few helpful suggestions. So it's something to definitely play around with. Okay, so to be safe, I'm going to undo that change as well. And now we have the proofread option. So this one is just proofread this. So let's click on this and see what happens. So here, again, it didn't make any changes. Maybe I should have introduced a few more little mistakes for it to catch. But we are most interested in more substantive editing anyway. So we're going to take a look at the natural. Let me just undo it and go back just to make sure we're starting fresh. So if I click on natural, what happens? So it's processing, and I made a couple of changes. Okay, so one change is to change unclear to uncertain. So personally, I don't think that is really helpful. The meaning of unclear versus uncertain is quite different. Unclear means you might know something, but it's just not really clear what's happening, whereas uncertain, it does indicate that something is not for sure, but the meaning is just a little bit different. So I don't know that I would go with that change, but that was interesting. And then the next one is, let's see, to change facilitate to aid in. So I want to give it some credit here that it took a long word, facilitate, that's multiple syllables, so it can make the text a little bit harder to read. And it changed it to 2 words that are each 1 syllable. So I could see some benefits there to improve the readability. Meaning-wise, let me see. Consequently, it is imperative to assess the causal relationship between serum albumin levels and atrial fibrillation to aid in the development of new therapeutic strategies for atrial fibrillation. I think that could work. I might choose a different word, which would be something we'll get into next week, but that's an option that I think we could consider. So that's not too bad. Okay, let's look at another option. So let's undo this so we start fresh, and then we are going to go to the streamlined option. So streamline any awkward words or phrases. Let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so the first change demonstrated to shown. I like that change. So demonstrated has a lot of syllables, and so it can be a little bit unclear. And so changing it to shown it's a shorter word and it has the same meaning. And so I like that change. Now, I will say that some people have mentioned to me, well, demonstrated is a little bit more of a concrete verb. Shown has different meanings. So in some cases, it may not be the best word, but in many cases, it is just fine. And it makes it a lot easier for readers to understand it. So I would definitely challenge that statement. And of course, there are always exceptions. Writing is based on principles, not rules. And so there are times when you might want to use demonstrate instead of show. For example, in a grant for a specific aim, I would say demonstrate versus show, because I think it's a little bit stronger in that particular context. Okay, what else do we see here? So we have down here, while this has been consistently observed rather than observed in many studies, that's a good change as well. So if you're saying that something is consistently observed, it is inferring that it's happened more than one time. So maybe that does help to weed out the in many studies, and you can buy a few words. So that's an interesting suggestion as well. Okay, let's see. A lot is happening in this last sentence. So we have, instead of consequently, change it to therefore. I like that change. You just saw my Grammarly pop up. I use it the same way as I use this. Like, oh, that's an interesting suggestion. And then I decide whether or not I want to take it. So back to the therefore versus consequently. So therefore is fewer syllables. So I like that. And I think that I would use therefore instead of consequently, although I might use the word thus instead because it's a shorter word, has a similar meaning, so you can buy yourself a few characters and a little bit of readability. Okay, so we also have, rather than it is imperative, we have it is essential. So let me see, imperative has 4 syllables, essential has 3 syllables. Okay, So here you buy a syllable, which is helpful for readability, but meaning-wise, it is imperative. It is essential. I think that they both have a strong meaning that something is really needed. I think imperative is slightly stronger, but I think for the case of what's needed here, I think essential is okay. So I think that's actually an okay suggestion. This would be one that would definitely be up to the authors. I might inquire with the authors whether this would be a change that's okay. Okay, and then later in the sentence, it made that same change to facilitate, to change it to aid in. Oh, and then it weeded out the nominalization development and said developing. So I like that. Nominalizations can drain the energy from your writing and they can use more words. I'll add a link to an article that I wrote about this in the description box so you can see what I mean. But by changing development to developing and then deleting the and the of, then it makes the text more concise and clearer as well, and more compelling, has more energy. So I like that change. And then we have new therapeutic strategies for atrial fibrillation to just strategies. Okay, so I see what it's wanting to do here is weed out some of the language. The thing that comes to mind for me here is that when you take out atrial fibrillation, it may cause the reader to think new therapeutic strategies for what? Granted, earlier in the sentence, we have atrial fibrillation, so could it be something that's redundant? I suppose it's a possibility, but I think to make sure that it's not ambiguous at all, I would actually keep in the for atrial fibrillation. Okay, so those are actually some good suggestions, some that I may take and some that I may not take. Let's take a look at the next level. So I'm going to undo this change so that we can start fresh. Okay, so now we're going to do the next one. We're going to do improve, which is proofread this, improving clarity and flow. Okay, I'm not feeling super confident about this because I have found that different AI tools are not very helpful with flow, but let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so it's processing. And so I'm seeing a lot of the same things as the previous version. So we changed demonstrated to shown, which I talked about before. We also have, while this association. Okay, so one thing that I like about this. So before it said while this has been. So this was an isolated pronoun, meaning that it didn't have a clear subject. And so the tool added in association, this association, to make it clear what this particular sentence is referring to. Now, I do like that it added a subject. I would have chosen a different subject. And the reason for this is the flow. So to connect the sentences, it's helpful to have similar words. And so I would have used correlation instead of association, and that way it just makes that connection to the preceding sentence a little bit stronger. So that was a great catch, I think, for this tool. Let's see, then we have that same change of making observed in many studies to just observed. We have the same change of consequently to therefore. And instead of essential, it changed imperative to crucial. You know, crucial is a little bit stronger than essential, I think. So it is imperative. It is crucial. That's not a bad change. I think that crucial is a little bit on par with imperative, and it's fewer syllables. It's actually fewer syllables than essential. So that might be one that I would consider. So that's not too bad. And then we come down to the end here. We have change facilitate to aid in again, which was good, but you notice it kept the development of. It didn't extract the verb from the nominalization. So that's kind of a bummer, but let's keep looking at this. So, and then instead of atrial fibrillation, it used this condition. So that way we don't have that redundancy of atrial fibrillation, but we're still saying what the new therapeutic strategy is for. So that's interesting. I'm seeing some things that I don't necessarily agree with, but some that I do. And it varies depending on which level or feature, editing feature that you select. So that's interesting. In some ways, I'm seeing how this could be helpful with small things. Okay, so that was improved. So we're going to undo that change, start fresh. So now we're going to do the next one, which is rewrite. So we're going to rewrite this, improving clarity and flow. So rather than just improving, we're going to rewrite it. So let's see, I shouldn't say we, the tool is going to rewrite it. Let's see what it comes up with. So we see the same thing, change demonstrated to shown. I like that. I like, here, it changed while to although. I like that change as well. So while can have multiple meanings, and so although is more precise. And I have an article about this that I'll add a link to in the description box so that you can learn a little bit more about that. Actually, I covered it in a YouTube video as well, and I'll add that to the description box as well. So I like that change. Let's see. It did pair the isolated pronoun with a clear subject. Instead of association, it used relationship. I like that. That's not bad. However, as I mentioned before, I would use correlation instead, just to make that connection a little bit stronger. And then later in the sentence, it said demonstrated. So instead of just shortening it to observed, it used demonstrated. I would have stuck with, if I had to choose between the two, I would have stuck with observed. It's fewer syllables. And I mean, demonstrated could work, but again, it's more syllables. You could say show instead. So I would stick with observed in this case. Okay, what else do we have? So instead of remain, it says are still unclear. I like that. So I'm not a fan of remain. I see that often, saying that something remains unclear or remains unknown. I would just use is. In this case, the tool said are still unclear. I like that. I like that a little better than remain. So that might be something to consider. Okay, so then how about the next sentence? Seems to be a lot happening in this last sentence. So it changed consequently to therefore again, and then instead of imperative, it went back to essential, and then changed assess to evaluate. Okay, that is something to consider as well. So assess is a vague verb, and so I often discourage using it. In most cases, there are exceptions, of course. And so here it changed assess to evaluate. Now, evaluate has more syllables than assess does, but it is a stronger verb. And so this might be a case where I would say, let's go with more syllables because we're using a stronger verb. So that's interesting. What else do we have? So we have the same change of facilitate to aid in. And then it kept the development of, that's interesting. And then again, changed atrial fibrillation to this condition. So again, there are some things that are actually not too bad that I would definitely consider changing, and others I might do something a little bit differently. Okay, so let's undo this one, start fresh, and see what happens with formal. So make this more professional. That's interesting. Let's see what happens here. So let's see, it changed demonstrated to established. I wouldn't necessarily say it's more professional. So we'll set that aside and we'll just look at the quality of what's written here. Established could work. It's a little bit stronger, I would say, than demonstrated. Demonstrated has a bit of they showed this thing, whereas established is, this is like really well known. So that's an interesting revision. I still like showed better, but that's one that you could consider. Let's see. It changed while to although. I like that change. We have the isolated pronoun with the subject relationship. We saw that before, and I talked about how I would handle that before. And then it changed this to observe. We've seen that a couple of times. And then a similar change of unclear to uncertain, and also consequently to therefore. So we're seeing a lot of the same things happening. Then we have it is imperative versus essential. So we've talked about that one before. Also assess to evaluate. I like this one. So it changed facilitate to support. I like that. So it changed facilitate. Facilitate has 4 syllables. Support has 2 syllables. So that's a benefit. But support is a lot stronger. Facilitate is kind of it's going to help. But support, there's some strength to that. So I like support. That's a good suggestion. And then it changed atrial fibrillation to this condition. So again, some things that I agree with, some things I would do differently. And of course, I'll highlight there are several things that I would change that it hasn't picked out yet. So let's see what happens when we go with the concise option. So let me undo these changes. We'll start fresh. And then let's go to concise, and it says cut the fluff. Let's see what it does here. So, okay, numerous studies have shown same change, so we like that. Something big happened here. While this has been consistently observed in many studies, it changed it to however. I like that change. So it cut out a lot of words. And if we're already saying that numerous studies have shown this, it's suggesting that something has been consistently observed. And so it's redundant. We can take that out. So I like that change. Let's see, we also it took out potential. So the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin levels in at-risk patients remain unclear. So potential, I think, would depend on how much hedging the author wanted to do. In this case, I'm tempted to keep it, or I might make a suggestion to the authors. It's not necessary for meaning, but I think that if that hedging is wanted, that might be something to keep. Okay, and then later in the sentence, it says levels in at-risk patients remain unclear. So the challenge with that is it's patients at risk for what? And so I think having this detail of patients at risk for atrial fibrillation is important. And then the at-risk patient, also, there's a little bit of labeling that's happening there. So I don't care for that as well. And if you're curious about the labeling, I tend to think of that more as a disease state. So saying that, for example, atrial fibrillation patient, you're labeling a patient as someone with atrial fibrillation, and it's in such a way that it can promote stigma and bias. And so instead of saying atrial fibrillation patient, you would want to say patient with atrial fibrillation. At-risk patient doesn't have as much of that, but it's still something that I find myself wanting to avoid. And actually, if you want to know more about labeling language to avoid and why to avoid it and what that looks like, I have a free inclusive language course, and I'll add a link to it in the description box in case you want to check that out. Okay, let's get to this last sentence and see what it suggests. So we have the same change of consequently to therefore, changed imperative to essential. We saw that. Something a little different here. So instead of facilitate the development of, it's just to develop. So it is essential to assess the causal relationship between serum albumin levels and atrial fibrillation to develop new therapeutic strategies. Okay, so with the develop, we've extracted the verb develop from the nominalization development. I do like that. And then we have that problem I discussed earlier where it's saying new therapeutic strategies, but for what? So I think adding a word or two after that could be helpful. Now, one thing I've also noticed is that when I've played with this tool, it suggests things at different times. So I'm going to undo this change and I'm going to click on concise again and just see if it gives me something a little bit different. So I click on concise again and let's see, it looks like it gave a lot of the same changes this time around. So let's undo that change. Let's go back to rewrite. That one, it kind of made some more substantive changes. Let's see if there's anything different. There are some differences here. So it could mean that you need to click on the button and generate things a couple of times and see what comes out of it and what might inspire you. So here we have the same change of demonstrated to shown. Instead of significant, we have strong. Okay, so this one we would need to be careful about because the word significant has a special meaning in scientific and medical writing. And so if this is something that is truly significant, p-value significant, or statistically significant, I should say, or clinically significant, or biologically significant in some way, we might want to keep that word. But if it's not, strong could work. So that's something that we would need to think about context-wise and data-wise. Then we also have, decreased to low. I do like that change. So decreased is actually one of the most misused words in scientific and medical writing, decreased or increased. And I get into this in a YouTube video. I'll add a link to it in the description box. But it's often misused. And so actually in this case, using low is more precise. So that I like. And similarly, instead of increased, it changed it to higher. So that's great. I might do something a little differently here. I would probably change low to lower so that you have that parallelism of lower serum albumin levels and higher incidence of atrial fibrillation. You have that kind of connection there. So I do like that. And then while this trend, I don't like trend. Trend is saying that it's not concrete or maybe not significant even. I don't like that one as much. And then we see a lot of the same things. So change this to observed. Instead of modifying, it went to altering. I do like that change. There's fewer syllables there. So it's a little bit more readable, a little bit clearer. And then we have down here are still uncertain. We saw that before. Change consequently to therefore. Instead of imperative, crucial, a lot of the same things. Changed assess to investigate. Okay, investigate is a little bit stronger than assess. It's more syllables. I think I liked the evaluate a little bit more. Although I will say that you can oftentimes replace investigate with study, and so it has fewer syllables. So if that were the direction I would want to go, instead of investigate, I would use study. I might like evaluate a little bit better, but I will tell you what I would actually do next week. So be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that. Okay, so what else do we have later? It changed facilitate to inform the development. That's actually not a bad consideration as well. So that would be something. Inform. Support is a little bit stronger, I think. There's some oomph behind it, but that's, you could consider which one you're more comfortable with. And then we have the change to strategies without saying strategies for what. So this could be a helpful tool to play around with. There are certainly some things that have come out of this that are changes that I would make. And there are a lot of things that have not been changed, have not been highlighted that I would change for sure to help improve the flow, the readability, the structure of it even. And so I will get into that next week. So those are my thoughts on what EditGPT suggested for the sample text. And some of the suggestions were good, and some of the suggestions were not so good. And there are several other things that I'd change that the tool didn't catch at all. And next week, I'll walk you through how I would revise the sample text so you can see how AI tools can be helpful, but humans are necessary. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.